cutting me off.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Season's greetings to all. I'm Maury Anderson, Planning and Building Services. Today, what we're requesting is that you receive a report from staff, receive public comment, and consider adoption of updates to our Alaska County Groundwater Monitoring Plan. We have today, for your benefit, a presentation by John Ayers, who is from GEI, our consultant, formerly of Brown and Caldwell. Also with him is David Freeman. Both have a long history with working with the county on the development of our groundwater management plan back in the day. And I thought it'd be good if John could just give a brief overview of how we got to where we are today and what it is we're trying to accomplish today versus all the other little bits and pieces of legislation that are sort of peripheral components of the legislation that's bringing us forward into the new day of CASGEM and GSAs and all that. But that's not what we're doing today. We're simply looking at our monitoring plan and updating it. And with that, I'll yield the floor to John and let him give his presentation.
John.
Hello, Supervisor Pyle, Board of Supervisors. Some faces I recognize, some I don't over the years I've presented.
It used to be a lot more new ones.
Another year.
It's just so. Where am I going? All right. So I'm going to give a presentation today. Dave Fairman's going to help me with some of the technical stuff because he was our boots on the ground person for that. And so I'll start with background, a lot of the history of groundwater planning in the county, why update CASGEM. We'll spend a moment talking about the differences between CASGEM stands for the California Groundwater Elevation Monitoring Program, statewide elevate. I always screw that one up. And then SGMA stands for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which I'm sure you've heard of, and it gets abbreviated SGMA, or as referred to in the industry now as SIGMA. So when I slip and call it SIGMA, please forgive me. I wanted to explain that ahead of time. And then we're going to get into the details of our work, updating the plan, the enhancement project, conclusions, next steps, because we still have some ongoing things going on. So, background. So, back in the 80s and 90s, there were rumors of Nevada wanting to put in wells in the Honey Lake Basin and pump water, and there was long before my time. I was still in high school back then. There was a action in the California legislature to establish groundwater management districts, and most of them are currently sitting inactive, but they're part of the story. And then in 2005, a group called the Fish Springs Intermountain Water Supply got together and decided to actually build that export project. And so they wrote an environmental impact statement, and they actually installed 3 wells, and they had a plan to pump 8,000 acre-feet per year out of the Honey Lake Basin through a pipeline to North Reno. And that actually was built, but not without a lot of protests from the county. And so the county protested the Nevada state engineer, who looked at the county protests and said, well, you guys aren't managing groundwater. Why do I have to listen to you? And it's a summary. And so as a response to that, the county adopted an exportation ordinance forbidding export of water outside the county. And then also in response to that, the county developed the Lassen County Groundwater Management Plan. This is where my introduction to Lassen County groundwater began back in 2007. And so the groundwater plan describes the existing Lassen County basin. There's 24 groundwater basins in Lassen County. Very unique in terms of California. Most California counties have 3 to 5, not 24. 24 is a big number. And it made this task a little bit more complicated. We had to dot our I's and cross our T's for a lot of areas. Anyway, so the groundwater plan describes the basins, protects existing uses, identifies implementation items. We built it with a working group made out of irrigators, members of the CSD, up and down from Big Valley down to Long Valley. So we had input from people who were on the ground using the water. And then it was adopted in March 13th of 2007. One of the implementation items in the groundwater plan was a development of basin management objective, which is something I headed up here in 2011. 2010, 2011. And so BMOs are based on groundwater level monitoring. What we did is we looked through the existing groundwater level monitoring grid, picked certain wells because of their better location, well construction information, similarity to use in each basin, and then set thresholds on them that required communication with the board. And I'm summarizing, there's a lot more details there. BMOs are a collaborative management approach, and so if things start to decline because of drought or so on, there's a lot of conversation. There's committees that are formed that would investigate and then report to the board, and it kind of creates a public record of the groundwater issues. And it's really guided by monitoring. We picked 12 management areas. You can see them on the map here: Big Valley, Madeline Plains, Eagle Lake, Willow Creek, Honey Lake, Long Valley. And this was adopted and codified as an ordinance under Chapter 17.02. While we were doing the BMO program, the state signed SBX 76, which created the CASGEM program. And we had a task in our BMO program for a data report or a data collection report. And we repurposed that to create a CASGEM monitoring plan. And what we did in that plan is we used the existing monitoring grid that has historically been monitored by DWR and still is to this day. And we use that as the wells for our CASGEM program. And so we wrapped that up and submitted it. And then in 2012, DWR came back to us and said, well, you're no longer completely approved, you're conditionally approved. And so they had another grant round coming, so we applied for a grant. Oops, too far. I'll go back. So we applied for a grant to do the CASGEM enhancement project, which we are doing now. This year, during the drought, Governor Executive Order B 2915 enacted restrictions on private municipal use and so on. But they also required that CASGEM be completed by December 31st of this year for any county, or specifically any groundwater basin, that wanted to apply for state funds in the future. And this is also the same year that, well, the year after, that Proposition 1 was passed by the public, which made a giant pot of money available for funding projects. So we're updating CASGEM, and now I can go to that slide. Why update CASGEM? It's basically, our monitoring is pretty good. We have some gaps that we're working to fill right now. The main reason we're updating the plan is to be compliant with that executive order so that at some point in the future, if the county decides to, we can pursue grants to do other groundwater projects. And that might be, in support of Sigma down the road, or it might be for something else, or more monitoring wells, or other thing. If we don't do CASGEM, we can't apply for money. We're categorically exempted at that point. So, let's see. So I have a couple slides about the differences between the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and CASGEM. CASGEM is a monitoring program only. It was enacted by SBX 76. It's focused on data collection. DWR requires that we talk about the monitoring county-wide in all 24 basins, and I'll get into how we do that later. Whereas Sigma is a management program and covers only medium and high priority basins at this time, which in Lassen County is Big Valley, and was created by 3 different bills in 2014. And as it gets implemented, it will require its own monitoring that is separate from CASGEM. Whoever does that, it doesn't have to be me, may choose to use the CASGEM wells in addition to the monitoring, or maybe that's adequate, we're not sure, but there's a separate program entirely. So what we are doing here is CASGEM, not Sigma, so there's no management component to what we're doing right now. So I'll spend some time talking about the actual project, what work we've done to update the plan to make it compliant with DWR requirements. So first thing we had to do was reapprove the existing monitoring grid. And we did a data gap analysis where we identified areas we'd like to get new wells. We went out and started doing some of that, added some wells, and David's going to talk about that. And then we've created an updated plan with a component called Alternative Monitoring Plan, which covers these basins that are throughout the county. There's 16, 17 of them that have 0 or 1 well in them. So there's no reason to monitor a well in a basin that's not being used. So the first thing we had to do was reapprove the existing monitoring grids. So these are the same wells in the same spots pretty much, and they're a little small, and I apologize for that. I should have done a better job making that bigger. But initially, DWR said we were okay, and then in 2012 they said, well, we need to know the well construction of these wells for this to be CASGEM compliant. And, well, we didn't do that, and so we wrote a grant saying we're going to go ask people for permission to use their well construction information. And between the time we wrote the grant and we started the detailed work on the project, Senate Bill 83 was passed, which made well logs public information, although when the department releases them, they redact the name and contact of the well owner. So because of that change in the regulatory climate, I'll say, we were able to convince DWR to just grandfather in the existing monitoring grid without having to spend a bunch of time contacting a lot of people. And so these wells are now in the CASGEM grid. And so, pardon me, so with those wells in mind, we moved on to a data gap analysis, and David's going to talk about that.
Morning. So I'm a geologist working with John on this project to kind of identify where in the county would be most beneficial to be monitoring groundwater levels. And of course, John talked about kind of the 16 basins that don't really have significant use. Well, that leaves 8 basins where there is significant use, and a lot of these monitoring wells have been around since the 1950s. Some have dropped off the monitoring grid, some have come on, and so we kind of did a reassessment of what's there and where the data gaps are that could need to be filled. Go back. And we identified those 4 basins in orange. In addition, the Secret Valley was also one we kind of took a look at, but we decided that the monitoring was appropriate in that one already. So what we did was to kind of zoom in on each of those basins, look at where the monitoring was currently, does it have monitoring wells, how are those monitoring wells distributed throughout the basins, are there enough of them to kind of cover the area. And we identified these kind of 5 basins as needing, as having data gaps. The 2 key ones that we focused in on were the Eagle Lake area, because there are over 400 domestic wells in that basin, and so it's relied upon pretty heavily, but there is no monitoring in that basin. So that was kind of a key one, to at least get something there to see what's going on over the long term. Madeline Plains is another example where it's a almost 250 square mile basin, and there's only 1 monitoring well in that basin. These others we identified, of course, Big Valley because of its medium priority status. I started contacting people to try to get permission and access to wells to see if they, first of all, were appropriate to use and whether they'd be willing to let the county use them in the monitoring grid. Started in Eagle Lake, talked to some residents, but also some public entities up there, like the Community Services District and the Forest Service, who have wells in the area. That picture on the bottom is a monitoring well around the evaporation ponds. They have 3 monitoring wells around there that they have given us permission to use. You notice the access is very easy to get the water level sounder in there because there's no pump or anything. In the Forest Service wells, they do have pumps in the wells. Pumps in the well isn't ideal for a monitoring network, but it can be done. And in this case, they have a good access port between the casing and the discharge pipe in order to be able to monitor at that Forest Service well, which, by the way, was used for this watering troughs for cow grazing and for wildlife up in just north of Spalding there. And finally, we went out into Madeline Plains and talked with Ed Kranz, who was part of the monitoring program out there and was very receptive to wanting to have some additional monitoring in this area. He is given permission to use his well out east of Termo. He has it covered under a tire to keep it from freezing during cold temperatures. But in all, we've added 6 wells. Excuse me, 6 wells in the Eagle Lake area and 1 here in the Madeline Plains area. So we're still continuing with trying to add more monitoring. Especially the Eagle Lake area, we're looking at that because Spalding is such a. We only have 1 monitoring well kind of near the lake in the town of Spalding, and that's kind of where the primary use goes on. But we're also need to kind of fill in some gaps in Madeline Plains, of course, Big Valley, and then Fall River Valley, which at this point is needs to have 1 more well in order to kind of meet the letter of the law. Although our CASDM funding is not at risk at this point. So
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks, David. So we're still looking for potential new people who wanted their wells monitored, ideally in Fall River Valley, Big Valley, Madeline Plains, or Eagle Lake. We have 3 more months. We're getting an extension on the grant funding so that we can do the project through the end of March to get these extra wells in. We wanted to initially get all the wells in before we submitted the monitoring program, but as time got short and getting out there was taking a lot longer than we had anticipated, we've brought the monitoring plan up for adoption with a term in there about updating the monitoring grid without having to bring it back in front of you each time. So we took David's work and updated the CASDM monitoring plan. So we've got our improved groundwater level monitoring from the site visits, and we covered all of the little itty bitty basins, which are known as alternative monitoring plans. So like Dixie Valley, and Grays Valley, and Pine Creek Valley, and Harvey Valley, and Tuladad Canyon, and Painter's Flat, and so on. There's a whole bunch of those. And so what an alternative monitoring plan does is SBX 76 required monitoring of all basins throughout the state without exception. And then a trailer bill came through a few years later that allowed for monitoring without having monitoring wells for cases like this where there's not a significant amount of use. And so monitoring is done through reviewing satellite imagery, reviewing zoning changes, and by reviewing the permits issued for these basins. And then the county is required to update every 3 years for these basins. It should be mostly just procedural because a lot of these areas are natural preserves and not really about to change. And so these alternative monitoring plans cover the areas with minimal use, we meet the letter of the law, and we get to move on. So while doing the development of the alternative monitoring plans, this is actually something I did, we got zoning and a GIS coverage from the county. And then we interpreted the zoning and combined the zoning. So if it was agricultural, different flavors of agricultural zoning, we combined that just to be agriculture. And so there's different amounts of, say, I think that's what I have this page for. In your booklet on page 84, we've got a map for full flat groundwater basin that says county zoning on it. And what that should say is a zoning summary. Galen caught up with me and said, hey, we're really concerned. We don't want someone to grab this report and then go to the county and say, well, the zoning says it's this. What this is a summary, not inaccurate. So we're going to update the plan and correct the title and add a disclaimer that says that this map shows summarized zoning and is not appropriate for land use planning. A couple other minor fixes is that we have a section in the plan about collaboration with other entities, which is like Sierra County, the community, nothing would be the Honey Lake RCD, and Modoc County. But we don't talk about Shasta County, even though we share a basin with Shasta County. And that's because we don't have any forward plans with Shasta County right now. But it looks like an omission. Wanted to address that, and we're Ewan and staff will stay in touch with the county and move that forward as needed. And then lastly, on some of our maps, we have a clearly labeled county boundary. It's, Shasta County to the west, and in one of them, the Modoc County, the Big Valley one, we don't label Modoc County. We're going to fix that also. So we've updated the CASGIM plan. It has been preliminarily approved by DWR staff all the way up to their senior reviewer, Brett Wyckoff. We have a proposed plan in the CASGIM system right now. And so what this does is approving the monitoring plan so that we stay eligible for state funding for future work. And so our next steps will be to finalize the plan if we are approved here, and then we'll add additional monitoring wells to the grid, same as before, Fall River Valley, Big Valley, Madeline Plains, Eagle Lake. And we're looking for anybody who has any leads for us.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Questions from the public?
Yes.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Number one, I remember hearing about this at a meeting up in Beaver sometime back. And as I recall, a takeaway from that meeting, basically the water that flows to the west and up in the Beaver area, which may end up in the Sacramento River, those wells are being monitored at a higher priority than as the water that essentially flows east.
Right. I briefly touched on that, and I'll go back to the slide where I have a figure that's related. There we go. So Big Valley is on the Pitt River, and all of Big Valley, including the Modoc portion of it, drains to the Pitt River. And Pitt River joins the Sacramento River and goes out to Delta. And not because it goes to Sacramento, it's been designated medium priority by the department. Again, this is not a CASGIM question. This is a Sustainable Groundwater Management Act thing. So separate from the project that I'm asking about today.
Isn't it on the new legislation?
It's the new legislation. Big Valley has been designated medium priority by the department because of the amount of use and the population and the groundwater condition.
Okay, so, and then with the wells, are you monitoring volume and quality?
No. So, all right, again, two different programs. The CASGIM program, we're only monitoring levels. So no quality, no production. Under Sigma down the road, that may be something that gets decided to do there. There has to be reporting in aggregate under Sigma, but that is that's a separate program.
So you're just monitoring the underground water table?
Yeah, we're just monitoring the table here.
Any other questions, David?
John, the additional wells, is the approval of the CASGIM sort of pending those additional wells being identified, or
No.
is that you're just, from your standpoint, your expertise, you're thinking we need those
Right.
to do a better job?
The CASGIM threshold is actually fairly low. The criteria that the department will mention, but you can't cite, like it's the unofficial criteria, is for low priority basins, they want at least one well per 100 square miles, and for medium priority basins, they want one per 10. But they won't let me write that down. We put it in our plan, they made us take it out. So for areas like Big Valley, we have 18 wells, and it's 130 square miles in the California side. We meet that criteria. But we know Big Valley is going to be under a lot of scrutiny because of Sigma, so we think it'd be good to add more wells now while we're being paid by the state to do so and benefit that area. Also, Madeline Plains needs a few more wells. So we're approved right now, but we think it's important to add a few more wells and get a better understanding. Madeline Plains in particular, the wells are in the center, the use is on the edges. We would like to get a few more in there.
Any other questions from the public? Sorry.
Aaron Dixon.
What's your name, sir?
Aaron Dixon. I'm from the Cinnamon Indian Rancheria. In your plan, do you have any other tribes in your water plan that you have written already?
Well, I don't know. I'm confused. What's the question?
The question is has any of the tribes in California gave their input in regards to the monitoring of the wells? And the next question is when you put up the Fish Springs project, you indicated there's going to be $8,000 or 8,000 acre feet that was going to be removed from the groundwater. Well,
That was actually built. I didn't do it. I'm not responsible. I'm well aware I started working
but in response, but your figures, the figures that I have, it's more. It's 14,000.
It's 14,000 now?
Yes.
Yeah, you know, the number I have in there is from the CIR for back in
I think that was
2005.
2000.
And I know they pumped it for a while, and then they shut down when the economy crashed. And I don't know if they've started pumping again or not. I do know
It's going again.
that in the groundwater plan, we identified a straight line of wells along the state line in Honey Lake. And they have a history of being completely flat, tenths of a foot movement per year. So if those start to move down, and land use on the Lassen County side has not changed, then it's pretty easy to make a strong case that the pumping on the Nevada side is the case. So we keep an eye on the monitoring that's right there, and I can point at it. It's right there along the state line. Oh, laser goes away. So it's right here. So we have about 5-6 wells here. We keep an eye on those, and as long as they're not going down, the pumping in Nevada is not adversely affecting Lassen County. If your tribe has some wells you'd like to be monitored or considered added for our monitoring program, we'd love to talk to you.
Well, I don't think we have wells, but we have springs that we have at least 6 springs on our trust lands, and 4 of them already dried up.
Yeah, it's been a dry time.
And my next question is that going to be a public document that
Oh,
I can
absolutely.
obtain
Yeah.
a copy of from the county?
Yes, there is public document already. And the update will be, I guess it's the way right here, it's updated. Yes, you can get that.
It is.
Yeah.
Is that online, or is this just a physical?
Well, before we as the consultant are able to publish it, we need to make sure it's approved by the board. So right now it's been draft. But since it's a board package item, I believe that is
Yes,
publicly available.
Madam Clerk says that that was part of the agenda and that there was a hyperlink that you could click to access that document. It's big, but it's there.
It's
watermarked proposed.
It is,
Correct.
yeah. It's not final. And it is complete, and it has all the reference information we used to develop.
And this is the same document that the DWR has tentatively indicated
Approved.
that meets their
Correct.
criteria.
It was already past the previous one.
Right.
And that's what we're using now, just to have updated.
This is the update because DWR kind of changed the rules on us afterwards and then gave us money to fix it.
And
So,
board passed this today, that this would become the new plan.
right. Then we would make the changes I talked about in the PowerPoint to clean up some of the errors, extend the language, and then we would make.
Okay, any more questions from the public? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board for questions. Aaron, I think you have
Yeah, David kind of asked about this based on how many more monitoring wells you wanted and or needed. You know,
Well-
I mean, they talk about the construction, you know, that they need to know how the wells were constructed, but yet you look at that one map there that you have up there, it shows the little dots and how many wells that they have the construction information on, and it's virtually all of them, especially in the Big Valley, except for like one. You know, and it's just, and then in this year, the proposed one, I noticed I was thumbing through here, you didn't have anything in Big Valley. for Big Valley.
Right. Well, no, Big Valley's in there with the monitoring wells. So we don't have an alternative monitoring plan for Big Valley because it's being monitored by wells. And I could go to, oh, this is a good map. So in this map, this is our data gap analysis figure. The basins that are green, we deemed had adequate monitoring. We weren't going to look for new wells there. The areas in yellow are ones that we were going to meet the CASM requirement via alternative monitoring planning, which is the satellite photos and the permits. And then the ones in orange are the ones where we were looking to add additional wells. Now, we're not required to add additional wells in Big Valley, but we thought we would be proactive in looking to add more monitoring since it's been designated medium priority for Sigma, that Sigma would likely require more monitoring in the future, just my professional opinion from what I know, that we would try to get more wells up there just as an additional benefit.
I see what you're saying with the alternative. Okay, I got that. You know, and interesting, I want to point out, you know, if you look at this map, it doesn't matter if they're orange or green. Those are all the basins that we have in Glasgow County that we're expected to monitor and tell people what they can and can't do. But then you look at all that white around there, which is BLM, Forest Service, we have zero control of that. But yet that's where all of our drainage goes. It goes to those basins, it goes to Eagle Lake, it goes to Big Valley, it goes to Honey Lake Valley, down to the lake to fill up if we ever get it. And that's where our groundwater recharge comes from, and we have zero say on what goes on in that whiteout. So, and, you know, but yet they're expecting us to manage everything within those little lines in the orange and the green. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with fish and game, you know, with the conservation easements, you know, and the well, they can do whatever they want. We have no say over that. The only ones we have any say over is the people sitting right here in this room, the private individuals. And we're expected to tax ourselves and to limit ourselves and to limit each other. And it's just, you know, it's just terrible that we have to do this to ourselves. I mean, we're just cutting our own throat. They want this information so they can take it back to Sacramento to say the fish in the Delta are more important than the fish at Eagle Lake because there's more oaks that come from down there. You know, the cow, you know, the hay in San Diego is more important than the hay up here because, you know, it's worth more in the woods.
Right, well, and I'm not going to disagree with you.
And so we got to find a way to incorporate all that white ground and how we monitor all that white ground as well, is what I'm saying. You know, whether it's...
Right, and I agree with you, but I think maybe, unless I'm seeing it wrong, the groundwater monitoring we're doing now with this particular project is nothing more than information to give a static reading of the groundwater. It doesn't matter what BLM or Forest Service does.
Right, but then you go like to Big Valley, where there's...
Big Valley is a different deal.
I know, but it's coming to right down there to that farm green in the Honey Lake Valley too.
Well, it could if they change their criteria to set up the changes between high, medium, and low priority.
We've got to get something set up where we have control over more than just those little boundaries.
I think we're talking two different.
Well, I'd be happy to do that project in the future.
You know, we need to keep that in the back of our minds as we move forward.
Right, the watersheds contribute to the recharge of the groundwater basins. So what's on the map are groundwater basins. Groundwater basins are delineated by the department as areas that have been filled with sediments that are transported by water. So Madeline Plains is an old lake bed. There's sediments in there that have been transported by rivers, creeks, and lakes, things that settle out. Same in Big Valley, same in Honey Lake, same in all of them. And the areas in between that are white are mountainous. They're in Lassen County, they're almost all volcanic rocks.
Would I be correct to say that a large majority of the groundwater basins are private land?
I have not looked at that, but I would say probably.
Most of it is either the valleys with the farming and the grading.
Right.
You get in your BLM and up in your mountains, there's no groundwater basins.
There's less incentive to own land in the mountains because you can't do as much with it. It's hard to secure a water supply up there because the fractured bedrock doesn't hold as much. And so, but the rain that does fall there does contribute. So you could look at the watersheds and then calculate how much rainfall is there and where that water might be going for water budget type calculation.
Okay, Jim, I think you have a question.
Yeah, that was that question I was going to expand a little bit. I think Mr. Holma raises a very significant point and one that we ought to be giving some thought to. And I think that the groundwater in white areas have influence and significant impact upon the orange and the green areas. I mean, they're not like isolated towers that don't. I mean, I think there's a lot of cross relationship. I mean, the Eagle Lake.
They're not. It's not groundwater.
Well,
Skedaddle is not a groundwater basin. Schaefer Mountain is not a groundwater basin.
It's not a basin, but the Schaefer Mountain provides water that fills it.
That eventually works its way down to it. And when the Eagle Lake Interagency Board was formed, it was formed on the premise that about a third of the property within the Eagle Lake Basin was under county control. So no matter what we did land use wise, it would affect the holdings of the other 2/3, which 1/3 was BLM and basically 1/3 was Forest Service, and the state lands kind of control the lake itself. And so what they do on their holdings and how they manage it is going to have an impact eventually on us. And that's, I think the concept of that kind of that cooperative interagency thing is fundamental, and I think that pertains even in this case. Now, we have to be appreciative of the fact that the Forest Service has pretty much all but declared they're not going to manage their resources. They don't want the public on the public land, and they're going to do everything to preclude it. So whatever could happen on their holdings probably won't have any effect other than the fact it'll burn up, and then that will cause other kind of pollutions and stuff to maybe run off from those burn areas that could affect our groundwater basins. But, you know, I think that that's tying all that together. I think we should make sure that that's not, we lose sight of that. I think Mr. Albaugh raises a very significant thing. Now, obviously, we've got to focus on oranges and the green areas, but where those areas get a lot of their water comes from that white.
For the watershed, correct. Certainly watershed affects every water basin, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like the study that they
No,
had.
we're not studying watershed here, we're studying the groundwater basin.
But we have to understand that the groundwater basins come from within the watershed. So I think there needs to be that causal linkage retained in there. I mean, not that we're going
The
to...
linkage is when you measure, in my wells, for instance, the static levels in March, and you check it again in October after the pumping off or you pump it after the winter. But you get there, whether it's 10 feet or 20 feet or 15 feet, the change would be created by these runoffs from the surrounding watershed. And that's when the watershed is measured by them things. So it is already.
Well, I think it's significant when we know what's happening in, let's say, I'm just going to use the Honey Lake Basin to start with. So in that green area, you know, in March and October, we know what the influences are and what's happening by the use at this level. But it'd be nice to know what is within the watershed that feeds into the Honey Lake Basin, what is happening with their static water level. Now, if their static water level is maintaining a very high level there, we know that there's the potential for the recharge to come into our basin. But, you know, if all of a sudden they've got problems up there, they're not going to be able to help us downstream, and then we've got even a bigger problem.
I think, Jim, what you need is a geologist right there. I don't think you're going to have static water levels on the top of Skidoo.
Right.
Well, I mean, it's not to say there aren't sediments outside of those basins that you can draw water out of. That's for darn sure. I think the department has defined those water basins with their best knowledge as to, you know, areas outside of those boundaries. Are, you know, if you pump outside that boundary, you know, in theory it should not affect inside the boundary. But we all know that.
Spend a moment talking about fracture flow.
Yeah,
because that's what we're.
Yeah, because up in those mountain areas, you're not talking about alluvial sediments. You're talking about you've got to know your fractures, and you got to drill your wells into those fractures and you know, kind of preferential pathways where the water comes in. It's a dicey business. It's a much more dicey business drilling a hard rock well than a sediment well.
Do you know what page that is in this big volume here? I was trying to find it.
This map, the data gap analysis that we did is not in the monitoring plan. We used it.
Well, I haven't been able to find it.
That's why you can't find it. We used it to guide what wells we selected that go into the monitoring plan. It's a nomenclature thing. We purposely didn't put it in the plan. It's one of our project deliverables because DWR uses the word data gap as a failure. And our data gaps are areas for improvement, not failure. And so we didn't want to confuse them while they reviewed our plan. And so
we're mixing up two things here. And again, I believe what we're being told and what I understand is the watershed runoff is what creates these static levels that they are measuring. By measuring this, it tells you what's happening up there.
Well, the concern I have is right here. You know, you've got hog, you've got McCoy, you've got all kinds of, you know, and they're not necessarily under private ownership, but they're upstream, feed into the Susan River.
That's surface water.
But
that's watershed runoff.
That's surface water, but also goes down.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's what they're measuring.
I know, but they're not measuring it up there because it's in the white area, and I think that's the point that Aaron's trying to make.
They don't have to measure it.
I know they don't have to measure it.
right.
So you guys are confused.
I actually have a partial answer to that.
I think Mr. Powell needs a lunch break.
The surface water is measured on river gauges. I don't know how many, I'm not a surface water guy, so I don't know how many gauges there are up here outside of what we put in the 2007 plan. But so the watershed contributes water to the river, and then it gets measured through these gauges, and then that water flows across the groundwater basin where it might recharge the basin. How much water in the river is obviously connected to how much recharge you get. We didn't look at that because this plan is all about strictly just monitoring the levels in the basin, and that would be a more comprehensive
The end product
study.
of all this, coming together, we measure the status of the world.
John, the other county, Shasta, Modoc, Sierra, Plymouth, what's their role in this?
Well, in terms of, so for our CASGEN project, Sierra is a co-monitoring agency down in Long Valley. There's a couple of wells, Long Valley extends into Sierra County. There's a couple wells in Long Valley that, in the case DWR stops monitoring, Sierra County will pick up and monitor and share that information with Lassen County. The Honey Lake RCD, same sort of deal. They monitor some of the wells. They monitor some of the wells in Honey Lake right now and report that to DWR. They would then report it to you. Modoc, we talk about monitoring in Big Valley, the north and south part, because obviously Big Valley is an important place, and we haven't had those kind of conversations with Shasta County.
And you're going to add Shasta County to the cooperative agency?
We certainly can.
I think we need to.
Yeah. So in here you say something about groundwater projects. Define that for me.
Groundwater project, funding for a groundwater project.
Yeah.
So by being CASGEN compliant, we're able to apply when the state rolls out money through Prop 1 or whatever program, local groundwater assistance, the old AB 303 fund that this work was funded under. If we get to identify what project we would like to fund, so sometimes it was implementing portions of the groundwater plan, the VMO project was funded by the state. This CASGEN compliance project, which is essentially a bureaucratic effort that the state required us to do and funded us to do. So those sorts of things. Otherwise, it's fairly wide open. It would be the county would have to want to do a project. We would have to talk about what that project is, what the benefits were, drawbacks, etc. And in order to go after a grant, we need board approval, resolution of intent. So any project that we would try to get funding for would come before you.
Okay. So we have 8 basins, and one of them is a high priority.
Medium.
Medium.
Yellow. Yeah,
Yellow.
Medium and high get lumped together. They
So
get to do signals.
These monitoring efforts, is that going to jeopardize our priority levels at the state level?
The answer is no, because they already
That's
have
a
monitoring.
million-dollar question.
Yeah, and the answer is no, because the monitoring already exists for them to do that anyway. And they've been doing the monitoring since the 60s.
I've been with IAM since '74, and they were doing it when I bought that place.
Okay. I didn't
It's
know
all,
that.
DWR has been doing it for a long time.
Reagan started it way back when he was doing it.
Okay. Any more questions? None from the public, none from the board. What's the pleasure of the board? Do you feel comfortable to pass this updated version, or are you, everybody totally confused?
This guy knows what he's talking about, and I believe what he has to say.
And he's right, and I agree with you. And the geologist, you know, he must have learned from me when he said it was that.
The one caveat is I think that after we dial in the stuff that's in the oranges and the greens and so forth, is I think we really do need to look at what's happening in those white areas and how they.
It's insignificant.
Yeah.
We spend our money and our time on significant issues, not insignificant issues. It's not an insignificant issue.
The good news you now will be long gone by the time.
Okay. So we debated this issue, you know. I'm right and Jim's wrong, like always.
What you learn after you know it all, Bob. And unlike Mr. Hodgman, you haven't learned anything.
So what is the pleasure of the board? What do you guys want to do? Chair would entertain a motion. I think what's the agenda asking for? Consider adoption of update.
So we'd like you to adopt the updated plan so we can tell DWR that you totally agree with it and then we can get it finalized.
So this is the one you want to adopt with
Right.
with the changes that you...
With the changes I talked about.
I would move that, Mr. Chairman.
It's good.
You don't know everything.
Also, second that. We got a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Questions from the public? Madam Clerk, would you call the board?
Supervisor Chapman.
You made the motion, you got it.
What I was going to say is I have to vote opposite of Bob Pyle, so I'm voting yes if you can vote no.
Supervisor Arba.
No.
Supervisor Hempel.
Aye.
Supervisor Hammond.
All right.
Supervisor Fire.
All right. Thank you guys for all your intelligence.